Time moves forward no matter what you do, but the vibration you hold in this moment can move ahead of it, rewriting the trajectory before the next second even arrives. When you clicked this video, something in you was already reaching for a faster path, something tired of waiting for circumstances to shift at their own pace. That instinct was not random. It was your inner signal beginning to rise, beginning to outrun the timeline you were on only a moment ago. This is the first proof that vibration moves faster than time itself, the recognition that a single realization can tilt your entire internal landscape before anything external has the chance to catch up. There is a subtle intelligence inside you that knows when your vibration changes, even slightly. You feel it as a soft widening in your awareness, a loosening in the mind, a brief sense that the reality you walked in with does not have the same grip on you anymore. Nothing outside has changed, yet something feels different. This is the moment when your vibration has already moved beyond your circumstances. Time hasn't adjusted yet, but your internal frequency has, and reality will have no choice but to follow. You've experienced versions of this your whole life. A sudden shift in clarity, a moment where you simply decide you're done with something. A quiet opening where what felt heavy becomes light without any external permission. These inner shifts happen instantly, long before the world reflects them. The world catches up later. It always does. That delay is not a flaw. It's evidence of the sequence. Vibration leads, time responds. When your vibration rises, you're not forcing reality to bend. You're stepping into a version of yourself whose timeline already bends. The change is so immediate internally that you often overlook it, waiting for physical proof. But physical proof arrives only after the internal shift stabilizes. That's why recognizing the instant change matters so much. It's the doorway into learning how fast transformation can truly occur. Right now, as you listen, your vibration is not the same as it was moments ago. Awareness itself is a catalyst. Understanding that your inner state can outrun time creates a subtle coherence in your system, a reorganization of how you relate to your own signal. And as that coherence grows, the quantum field around you begins to respond. Not dramatically yet, not with massive life changes, but with the first small bending of probability in your favor. If you feel a slight lift, even if it's faint, acknowledge it. That is the beginning of the shift. That's the signal that time is no longer dictating the pace. Your frequency is. And if this realization alone created a sense of expansion in you, let it be the marker that you've already stepped into the next space. You've already moved ahead of the moment you were in. And if you feel that truth settling into you right now, go ahead and tap the like button, not as a gesture to the channel, but as a way of affirming the signal you just activated within yourself. When reality feels slow, it's not because life is withholding anything from you. It's because the signal you're broadcasting is moving at a different pace than the outcomes you want. Lower frequencies create a kind of internal drag, a subtle heaviness that makes everything seem delayed. You might interpret it as stagnation, resistance, bad timing, or even personal failure, but at its core, it's simply a mismatch between your current vibration and the timeline you're trying to access. This isn't a judgment, it's mechanics. Lower frequency states tend to fragment your internal signal. When your attention is scattered, when your emotions pull in different directions, or when your internal dialogue loops on familiar worries, the field reads that signal as noise, and noise has difficulty shaping reality. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because it creates a diffuse, unfocused transmission. A scattered broadcast takes longer to reflect back, so the world seems unresponsive, even though it's actually responding with perfect accuracy to the vibration you're holding. Think about the moments when life felt heavy or slow. In those periods, your consciousness was often stretched across past regrets or future concerns. Your energy wasn't present enough to gather itself into a coherent signal. And coherence is what makes reality move. Without it, you feel like you're walking through water, pushing against invisible resistance. But the resistance isn't external. It's the friction between your desired state and your actual frequency in that moment. At lower vibrations, you may also notice that possibilities seem fewer. Not because the world has less to offer, but because your perception tightens. You see fewer pathways, fewer openings, fewer synchronicities. This narrowing isn't a flaw. It's a natural consequence of being in a state where consciousness is conserving energy. When your frequency dips, your awareness shifts toward survival patterns that favor predictability over expansion, and predictability always feels slow. There's also something else that happens in lower states. Time feels heavier. Minutes stretch. Days blur. Progress seems distant. This is because your internal momentum has slowed, and the outer world is simply mirroring that deceleration back to you. Time itself doesn't change. Your relationship to it does. When vibration drops, the sense of movement drops with it. You're still moving forward, because time never stops. But the movement feels forced rather than fluid. It's important to recognize that none of this means you're stuck. A slow-feeling reality is not a verdict. It's a reflection of where your signal has been resting. And the moment you shift that signal, the reflection changes. But here in this chapter, the purpose isn't to teach you how to shift it yet. It's simply to help you understand the mechanics so that when the faster path is revealed, you'll recognize why it works so immediately. For now, just notice how often you equate slowness with failure. Notice how often you assume the world isn't responding, when in truth it's responding perfectly to the vibration you're carrying. Understanding this removes the pressure and opens space, and in that space the possibility of speed begins to return, not as force, but as alignment waiting to be activated. There is a moment in every transformation where you realize the long road was never the real road, it was simply the familiar one. You've been taught your entire life that effort is the engine of change, that pushing hard enough will eventually bend reality into shape. But deep down, you've always felt the contradiction. There are times when you push and nothing moves, and other times when you shift internally just a little, and everything begins rearranging around you. That difference isn't luck. It's the mechanics of the field responding to your internal state long before it responds to your external actions. The truth is simple but not always easy to accept. Your internal state is faster, more precise, and more influential than anything you do physically. Not because effort is useless, but because effort only amplifies the frequency you already hold. Action can't override your vibration, it can only express it. When you try to change your life through effort alone, you end up reinforcing the very state you're trying to escape. You push harder, but the vibration beneath the pushing stays the same. And so the field mirrors that sameness back at you. When your internal state shifts, everything else becomes secondary. The quantum field reads your frequency, not your intentions, and certainly not your frustration. It responds to what you are, not what you're trying to force. That's why two people can take the same actions and end up with entirely different outcomes. One acts from alignment, the other from lack. One moves from coherence, the other from pressure. And the field does not confuse the two signals. It responds with accuracy, not sentiment. Think about moments when life opened effortlessly, times when opportunities appeared, timing aligned, and things fell into place before you had the chance to overthink them. Those moments didn't come from strategy. They came from a quiet alignment inside you, a temporary clarity that allowed your signal to broadcast cleanly. You weren't doing more. You were being aligned. And alignment moves faster than effort ever will. There is a hidden passage inside every present moment where the internal state becomes the master key. It's not mystical, it's immediate. When your vibration organizes itself, when attention stops scattering, and the internal noise settles, you generate a frequency the world can actually respond to. Not slowly, not eventually, but with a kind of immediacy that feels almost uncanny once you learn to recognize it. This is the shortcut people sense but rarely understand. It's the reason someone can shift their inner stance and find doors opening that were closed minutes earlier. It's why certain breakthroughs happen suddenly, after long periods of apparent stagnation. The stagnation wasn't lack of effort. It was misalignment. And the breakthrough wasn't chance. It was coherence. You don't need to know the technique yet. You only need to understand the landscape you're standing in, a reality that listens to your internal state more closely than your actions, a field that organizes itself around your frequency, not your force, and a path forward that becomes much shorter the moment you stop trying to push your way through and instead begin learning how to shift the state that precedes every action you take. There is a threshold inside you where the field begins to shift, not because you forced anything, but because your internal signal finally becomes clear enough for reality to recognize. This moment isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it rarely comes with fireworks or sudden epiphanies. Instead, it arrives like a gentle alignment, an almost imperceptible softening in how you stand within yourself. When the noise quiets, even slightly, the quantum field feels it. It senses a coherence forming, a steadying of your frequency, and it begins to respond. Most people miss this moment because they expect external proof first. They wait for circumstances to validate the shift. But responsiveness begins long before anything physical has the chance to move. It begins when your internal rhythm changes, when your attention stops scattering into past or future, when the emotional static starts dissolving. In that quiet realignment, the field receives a new instruction. Not through words, but through vibration. This responsiveness isn't about convincing reality to cooperate. It's about no longer sending mixed signals. When your inner state is divided, the field cannot mirror anything clearly. But when your vibration becomes unified, even for a few seconds, the field responds with surprising speed. It begins reorganizing probability, adjusting trajectories, redistributing timing. Nothing visible may happen immediately, but the invisible architecture starts shifting position the moment your signal stabilizes. You've felt versions of this many times. A brief sense of certainty that didn't come from logic, a sudden clarity about what you want, a moment where fear loosens its grip without explanation. These subtle openings are not psychological tricks, they are vibrational alignments, and every time you felt one, your outer world began moving in response, even if the shift showed itself hours, days, or weeks later. The internal alignment always comes first, the external reflection always follows. The field becomes responsive the moment you stop feeding the old frequency, not when you push harder, not when you affirm something repeatedly. It shifts when you stop energizing the vibrational pattern that kept your life circling the same outcomes. In that pause, however brief, your signal rises above the noise. That rise is what the field listens for. Responsiveness also expresses itself in subtle ways: a small coincidence, a brief alignment in timing, a conversation that feels lighter, an intuitive nudge that wasn't available before. These early signs are easy to dismiss because they seem insignificant, but they're not. They're the first signals that the quantum field has received your frequency change and is beginning to reorganize itself accordingly. This chapter is not about teaching the technique. It's about recognizing the landscape into which the technique will be introduced. You're learning to sense the moment when reality becomes pliable, when the field is no longer echoing old patterns, but is waiting for your next instruction. You're learning to identify the shift in yourself that precedes all external change. This is the hinge point of transformation, the instant when the field starts paying attention. Everything that comes next builds on this responsiveness. Everything that changes in your life begins here, in this quiet intersection between your rising vibration and the field's answer. Perception feels like a passive process, as if the world arrives fully formed and you simply witness it. But perception is selective. It filters, highlights, ignores, and prioritizes based on the vibration you're holding in any given moment. Your consciousness is not just observing reality, it is shaping which version of reality you are capable of seeing. When your vibration is low, your perception narrows. It gravitates toward familiar patterns, predictable interpretations, and outcomes that match the frequency you're broadcasting. You might notice obstacles more easily than openings, problems more readily than possibilities. It's not because the world has changed, it's because your internal state has adjusted the lens. When your vibration rises, that lens opens. Subtle opportunities that were once invisible begin to appear. Conversations feel lighter, timing feels smoother, and your intuition sharpens because your awareness can finally detect the signals it previously filtered out. High vibration doesn't change the world first. It changes what you're able to perceive within it. You start noticing pathways you were blind to, synchronicities you would have dismissed, and connections your mind couldn't register while in a contracted state. Perception expands with your frequency. This is why two people can stand in the same situation and see completely different realities. One sees limitation, the other sees potential. One senses threat, the other senses timing. Their external circumstances may be identical, but their vibrational states filter the experience into two distinct worlds. Consciousness can only reveal what aligns with its current frequency. You cannot perceive from a state you aren't vibrating in. That's why a person in frustration cannot see solutions, and a person in clarity doesn't even register the friction that others feel. When your vibration is scattered or fragmented, your perception becomes noisy. You misread signals, interpret events through outdated emotional patterns, or anticipate outcomes distorted by fear. But as soon as your vibration begins to organize even slightly, your perception stabilizes. You interpret events more accurately. You read the energy of situations with more precision. This shift in perception is often the first internal sign that your vibration is rising, even before you feel any emotional elevation. Your perception also determines how you interact with time. At lower frequencies, time feels compressed or sticky because your awareness keeps looping back into familiar narratives. At higher frequencies, time feels more spacious, not because there is more of it, but because your consciousness is no longer constricted. You experience more in the same amount of time because your perception can hold more information without collapsing into old patterns. What matters here is understanding that perception is not neutral. It is an active reflection of your vibration, shaping the reality you believe you're experiencing. You're not waiting for the world to change. You're learning how your frequency determines what the world looks like before anything external shifts. This chapter is about recognizing the mechanics of your inner lens so that when the technique arrives later, you'll understand why even a small rise in vibration begins reshaping the very way you see your life. Possibility is not a static category that sits outside of you, waiting to be accessed through luck or the right sequence of external actions. Possibility is a field, and your vibration determines which parts of that field you can interact with. When your frequency is low or fragmented, the field appears limited. Options look narrow, routes seem blocked, and the future feels constrained. Not because the possibilities aren't there, but because your current vibration cannot register or resonate with them. You're standing in a vast landscape with most of it dimmed out, illuminated only in the small areas that match your internal state. When your vibration rises, the field expands from the inside out. Possibilities you couldn't see before begin to surface, not as random events, but as natural extensions of your frequency. It's like tuning a radio. When the dial shifts to a clearer signal, more stations become available. even though they were broadcasting the entire time. Reality works the same way. The quantum field is always holding countless potentials, but your vibration is the tuner determining which ones you can receive. At higher frequencies, you access possibilities that carry momentum, ease, and alignment. These are the paths that seem to open by themselves, the ideas that arise with clarity, the choices that feel like they were waiting for you. You're not forcing anything into existence. You're entering a range of the field where those potentials already exist. This is why certain breakthroughs feel sudden. It's not that the opportunity appeared out of nowhere. It's that you finally vibrated at the level where you could perceive it. Lower vibrations, on the other hand, collapse possibility. They pull your awareness toward predictable outcomes, often based on past experiences. You might find yourself repeating old choices, gravitating toward familiar patterns, or feeling like the future offers nothing new. These loops are not signs of failure. They're signs that your frequency has dropped into a narrow band. In that band, your consciousness becomes selective in a way that hides anything outside the familiar range. Possibility is also shaped by the emotional quality of your vibration. Elevated states like appreciation or optimism don't just feel uplifting, they widen the field. They open perceptual and intuitive channels that allow you to interact with potentials that are higher in quality and more aligned with your deeper self. Meanwhile, contracted states don't just feel heavy, they compress the field. They make the range of accessible outcomes smaller and more repetitive. Understanding this removes the illusion that possibility is an external resource to be chased. The field is not withholding anything from you. It is responding to your frequency with perfect consistency. And as your vibration shifts, the entire layout of your potential future shifts with it. Choices that once seemed impossible become reachable. Paths that felt distant start pulling you forward. The architecture of your life begins reorganizing, not because you changed the world, but because you changed the frequency that determines what the world can show you. This chapter is not about accessing those possibilities through technique yet. It is about understanding why possibility bends, why options seem to multiply or collapse, and why your vibration quietly dictates the range of outcomes available to you long before any external evidence appears. Most people try to raise their vibration through methods that are slow, indirect, and exhausting, not because they lack discipline, but because they've been conditioned to approach inner change the same way they approach outer change, through effort, repetition, and force. They try to think their way into a higher state, push themselves toward positivity, or fight against the emotions they don't want. But vibration doesn't rise through pressure. Pressure reinforces the very state you're trying to escape. When someone tries to elevate their vibration by controlling their thoughts, they usually end up entangled in them. Thought loops tighten, resistance increases. The mind becomes a battleground. This approach is slow because it keeps the focus on mental content rather than the internal state beneath it. Thoughts do not generate vibration, they echo it. Trying to shift vibration through thought alone is like trying to change the climate by rearranging the clouds. You're interacting with the symptoms, not the source. Another slow path is emotional suppression. People assume that ignoring or overriding their lower states will somehow lift their vibration. But suppressed emotions don't disappear. They settle into the background and influence the signal you broadcast without your awareness. This creates a split inside you, a forced calm on the surface and turbulence beneath it. The field reads the turbulence, not the performance. Suppression delays alignment. Some pursue external fixes, changing routines, environments, or relationships in hopes that circumstances will lift their energy. While external shifts can help, they rarely create the internal coherence needed for a sustained rise in vibration. You can change your scenery, but if your internal state remains scattered, the same patterns reappear in new forms. The field doesn't respond to location, it responds to frequency. Another common slow approach is relying on motivation or willpower. These states spike briefly and then collapse because they aren't grounded in vibrational stability. They push you forward for a moment, but the energy behind them is inconsistent. When the push fades, the old vibration returns, and with it, the old outcomes. Willpower is a poor substitute for alignment. Many people also try to raise their vibration by collecting information, learning more, studying more, consuming endless content about transformation. But information doesn't shift vibration unless it sparks an internal realization. The mind can accumulate concepts for years without creating a single vibrational shift if the body and identity remain unchanged. Knowledge is not the same as frequency. What makes these methods slow is not that they're wrong, but that they don't address the mechanism the field actually responds to. They operate on the surface rather than the signal. They assume time must pass, repetitions must accumulate, and circumstances must adjust before vibration can rise. But vibration rises instantly when the right internal switches are activated. This chapter exists so that you can recognize the inefficiency of the old approach before learning the fast one. When you understand why the slow path drags, you become receptive to the idea that a rapid shift is possible. And once that receptivity opens, the shortcut can reveal itself. Not as a mystical trick, but as a direct engagement with the state that precedes every outcome in your life. There are 4 vibrational levers inside you that most people rarely access consciously, not because they're hidden, but because they're quiet. They don't demand attention the way thoughts do. They don't push themselves forward like emotions in turmoil. They sit beneath the noise, waiting for you to notice the architecture that actually shapes your internal state. These 4 levers are not the technique themselves. You'll learn the steps later. Right now, you're learning that the mechanism exists, that there are deeper controls within you than the surface-level ones you've been taught to rely on. The first lever is the moment itself. Not presence in the poetic sense, but the actual ability to interrupt the momentum of an old frequency. Most people live in a continuous stream of past and future, never realizing that the moment is more than time passing. It's a reset point. When you step into the moment, the old signal loses its authority. This lever doesn't change anything yet. It simply stops the old pattern from reinforcing itself. The second lever is the emotional signal you choose to activate. Most people assume emotions are reactions, but they are also generators of frequency. The emotional state you step into becomes the tone you broadcast. You haven't learned yet how to shift into elevated emotion, but understanding that emotion is a lever prepares you to recognize that your feelings are not passive, they are instruments. Without this recognition, the technique later would feel abstract. With it, you'll see why the emotional shift matters so much. The third lever is identity, not the long-term self-concept, but the subtle internal stance you take in each moment. Identity is the most overlooked vibrational lever because it operates quietly. It's not something you think about, it's something you broadcast. Every internal posture, every sense of who you are right now, generates a frequency that the field reads instantly. People try to change their emotions or thoughts, but they rarely realize that identity is the source signal beneath both. You're not embodying anything yet, that comes later, but you're beginning to sense that identity plays a role you've never been taught to use deliberately. The fourth lever is coherence. This is the stabilizing force, the moment when your vibration stops flickering and becomes consistent enough for the field to respond. Coherence isn't created through discipline. It emerges when your moment, your emotional signal, and your identity align. When these 3 levers come into harmony, coherence locks the signal in place. You don't need to understand how to create coherence yet. You only need to understand that it is the final lever, the one that transforms a shift into a broadcast that reality can actually mirror. Most people rely on surface tools, thoughts, effort, habits, and overlook these deeper controls. They try to rearrange their lives from the outside, never realizing that these four levers operate from beneath the surface, quietly shaping the vibration that shapes everything else. You're not being asked to use them yet. You're simply being shown that they exist, so that when the technique arrives, you'll recognize why it works so quickly. These levers aren't tricks, they're the mechanisms your vibration has been using all along. You're about to learn how to use them on purpose. The present moment is not simply a point on the clock. It is a vibrational doorway, and stepping through it resets the momentum of your entire internal state. When you bring yourself into the present moment, you interrupt the frequencies that were running your life a few seconds ago. You cut the thread connecting you to the past you were recreating and the future you were anticipating. This step matters because most of your vibration is shaped by unconscious momentum. Old emotions, old interpretations, old identities still echoing through you. The present moment interrupts the echo. To enter it, you don't force anything, you don't freeze the mind or command your thoughts to stop. You simply turn your attention toward what is here now rather than what was or what might be. This shift is subtle, but it is powerful. It's like stepping out of a moving stream onto solid ground. The mental current doesn't stop instantly, but you no longer move with it. In that pause, your vibration resets just enough for change to become possible. You might notice, even now, a slight clearing as you listen. That feeling is the beginning of presence. It isn't dramatic. It's not a burst of stillness. It's the soft recognition that you are here. Not in a story, not in a memory, not in an expectation, just here. When you occupy this moment fully, the noise that usually shapes your frequency begins to lose its influence. You shift from being a reactor to being an observer. That shift is vibrational. The reason this step comes first is because you cannot elevate emotion or embody a new identity while you're still entangled in the old ones. Without presence, any attempt to shift your vibration layers new signals on top of old momentum. But when you step into the moment, you clear the space where the next steps can land. It's like resetting the canvas before painting. The field recognizes this reset immediately because your consciousness becomes more coherent. The internal static lessens, and a clean frequency begins to form. Presence also changes your relationship with time. When you're lost in past or future, your vibration is stretched thin. You broadcast multiple frequencies at once: regret, anticipation, worry, nostalgia, and the field reflects all of them, which is why life can feel chaotic or slow. But in the present moment, your frequency consolidates. It becomes singular, and the field can finally mirror something clear. You don't need a ritual to enter presence. You don't need perfect conditions. You only need to redirect your awareness to what is directly in front of you. The sensation of your breath, the feeling of your body, the quiet behind your thoughts, the texture of this exact moment. Even a few seconds of this shift create a noticeable change in your vibration. As you anchor here, you might sense a soft widening, a small but measurable lightness. That is the internal signal stabilizing. This is where the old vibrational patterns stop recycling themselves. Presence is not the transformation itself. It is the ground on which transformation becomes possible. And by stepping into it now, you've already completed the first shift the technique requires. Your attention is the steering mechanism of your vibration. Wherever it rests, your frequency follows. This is why the second step of the technique is to deliberately shift your attention into the elevated emotional state you want to experience. Not by forcing yourself to feel something, and not by pretending your current state isn't there, but by choosing where your awareness points in this moment. Emotion is not only a reaction, it is a signal you can generate by directing your focus toward the feeling you want to inhabit. The key here is subtlety. You're not trying to leap from one extreme state to another. You're simply inviting your attention to lean toward an elevated emotion, appreciation, clarity, relief, openness, optimism, or whatever resonance feels accessible to you. When your attention leans in that direction, the emotional frequency begins to rise on its own. Emotions follow attention the way a plant turns toward light. You don't pull them into place, you orient toward them and they grow. Most people try to change emotion using thought, but emotion responds more quickly to focus than to logic. You can't argue your way into higher emotion, but you can feel your way into it by shifting the internal emphasis. You're guiding the body into a vibrational tone, not through force, but through orientation. Even the smallest adjustment matters. A 2% tilt toward a higher emotion can begin altering your entire internal field. At this stage, you don't need intensity, you need direction. As your attention settles on the elevated state you're seeking, notice the difference between thinking about the emotion and feeling the emotion. Thinking creates a concept. Feeling creates a frequency. What you're cultivating here is the beginning of that frequency. It may feel subtle, like a slight warmth, a soft expansion, or a quiet calm rising beneath the surface. These are not minor sensations. They are the early signs that your vibration is shifting into a new register. This step also invites you to recognize that elevated emotion is not something you wait for. You generate it. You choose it by opening the internal space for it to emerge. You're not manufacturing a feeling. You're allowing the body to tune itself to a higher signal by placing your attention where that signal lives. The moment your awareness consistently touches an elevated emotional tone, even for a few seconds, your frequency begins to move upward. It's important to understand that you're not bypassing anything. You're not denying lower states. You're simply shifting your attention away from the frequency you no longer wish to anchor. This is how vibration changes with elegance, not through suppression, but through redirection. The field reads this redirection immediately because emotion carries a strong vibrational charge. As your emotional register rises, your signal becomes more coherent, more magnetic, and more visible to the quantum field around you. As you continue allowing your attention to rest in that elevated emotional tone, you may sense the first internal lift, a slight brightening, a small uncoiling inside you. That is the emotional signal beginning to align. You're not fully embodied in it yet. That comes in the next step, but you're tuning the dial. And once the dial moves, even slightly, the entire frequency of your being begins to rise with it. Identity is the anchor point of your vibration. The emotional state you cultivated in the previous step is the doorway, but identity is the room you step into once you cross the threshold. To embody the identity that naturally holds your elevated emotional state means to shift from feeling the emotion temporarily to being the kind of person for whom that emotion is normal, familiar, and effortless. This is not imagination in the fantasy sense. This is alignment in the vibrational sense. You're choosing the internal posture of the version of you who already lives from this elevated state without having to force it. Every identity broadcasts a specific frequency. The version of you who feels confident, clear, grounded, or open isn't defined by circumstance. They're defined by the internal stance they hold. They interpret situations differently, they respond differently, they perceive opportunity instead of threat, momentum instead of stagnation. They navigate the world with a vibration that matches the emotional tone you're leaning into. Embodying that identity means stepping into their orientation, how they breathe, how they hold themselves, how they expect life to unfold. It's not about pretending, it's about remembering the configuration of consciousness that aligns with the frequency you're raising yourself into. You don't need to visualize anything or construct a story. Identity is simpler and more immediate than that. It's the subtle shift in who you are being right now. You can feel the difference between acting from an elevated emotion and becoming the one who naturally radiates it. The shift happens in the quiet space beneath your thoughts, where your assumptions about yourself rearrange. You stop reaching for the elevated state and begin inhabiting it. It becomes less about effort and more about orientation. When you embody the identity that matches the elevated emotion, your vibration becomes coherent at a deeper level. Emotion is powerful, but identity gives it structure. Identity turns a temporary feeling into a stable signal. This is why people can feel inspired for a moment, but fall back into old patterns. The emotion rose, but the identity remained unchanged. Embodiment resolves that gap by allowing the elevated emotion to become part of who you are, not just something you briefly accessed. You may notice a subtle shift in your internal dialogue when this embodiment clicks. The questions you ask yourself change, the assumptions you hold change, the decisions you consider change. Identity reshapes the way you move through the world without requiring external proof first. When you embody a new identity, your frequency organizes itself around that stance. It becomes the new baseline vibrational tone from which your thoughts, emotions, and actions emerge. The field responds strongly to identity because identity is stable. It doesn't flicker the way emotions do. It broadcasts a clear, ongoing frequency that the quantum field can recognize and reflect. By stepping into the identity that already holds the elevated emotional state, you're aligning your internal architecture with the vibration you want to sustain. You're not forcing a new self into existence. You're stepping into the version of you who was already available, but waiting for your signal to rise. When you embody that identity now, even lightly, your entire vibrational field begins reorganizing around that choice. Coherence is the moment your vibration stops flickering and becomes unmistakably clear. It's not created through pressure or concentration. It emerges when your attention rests long enough on the identity you've stepped into for the signal to stabilize. This step is about holding, not gripping, not forcing, but sustaining your awareness of the version of you who already carries the elevated emotional state with ease. When your attention stays with that identity, even gently, the field begins to read a consistent broadcast instead of a shifting one. You'll notice that coherence doesn't feel like intensity. It feels like alignment. It feels like something inside you has clicked into place, even if only slightly. The emotional tone from the previous step deepens. The internal noise quiets, and the identity you're embodying stops feeling like a choice you're making and starts feeling like a state you're inhabiting. You're not trying to become anything in this moment. You're simply maintaining the orientation you already stepped into. Coherence grows from consistency, not effort. Holding your attention on the identity doesn't mean thinking about it. It means staying anchored in the internal posture of that version of you, the breath of that version, the expectation of that version, the calm or clarity or confidence that version naturally radiates. You're allowing the elevated emotion and the embodied identity to converge into a single vibrational tone. This convergence is what the quantum field responds to. Not fleeting emotion, not scattered intention, but coherence. At first, coherence may appear in brief pulses, tiny moments where you feel wholly aligned, like everything inside you is flowing in the same direction. Those pulses matter. They are the beginning of a stable frequency. As you maintain gentle attention on the identity, those pulses lengthen. The gaps between them shorten. The mind stops reaching for proof because coherence creates its own sense of inevitability. You feel less like you're trying to change your vibration and more like you're allowing it to settle into its natural resonance. This step also dissolves internal contradiction. When you hold attention on the aligned identity, competing thoughts lose their charge. Old emotional patterns loosen. Habitual self-concepts stop pulling at you. You're no longer broadcasting multiple frequencies at once, you're broadcasting one, and when your internal state becomes singular, the external world has no choice but to respond to that clarity. Coherence is the point where your vibration becomes strong enough to shift probability. You might feel a soft warmth spreading through your chest, a widening in your awareness, or a calm that doesn't feel fragile. These sensations are the physiological signatures of coherence. They're subtle, but they mark the moment your frequency becomes organized. You don't need to amplify them. You only need to remain with them. The steadiness is the signal. As you hold your attention on the identity, you begin to sense the difference between trying to manifest something and becoming the version of you for whom that reality is natural. Coherence removes the gap between desire and being. It stabilizes the frequency that aligns your inner state with the life that matches it. Once coherence is felt, even lightly, the technique is complete. Your vibration is no longer a request. It's a declaration broadcast through every layer of your internal field, and reality will begin bending toward it. When your vibration rises and coherence begins to settle, the very first place you'll notice change is inside your perception. Before anything external rearranges, your internal world starts to bend. This is not imagination. It is the direct consequence of your frequency shifting into a new register. Perception is sensitive to vibration. It updates faster than circumstances, which is why reality often feels different before it looks different. This is the earliest confirmation that the technique is working, not in events, but in the way you experience yourself moving through the world. You may find your thoughts becoming quieter or less reactive. Situations that once triggered tension feel less sharp. You see more nuance in what's happening around you, not because the world softened, but because your consciousness is no longer filtering everything through the lens of an outdated state. Your internal space becomes wider, your body feels less braced, your attention feels less scattered. These micro shifts are vibrational, not psychological. They show that the old frequency has loosened its grip and the new one is beginning to take root. Another perceptual shift you'll notice is an increase in clarity. Options that once felt confusing begin to make sense. Decisions that once felt heavy become lighter. You start sensing the natural trajectory of things, not through analysis, but through a quiet knowing. This clarity isn't the result of thinking harder. It's the result of your frequency rising to a point where your perception can reveal patterns and possibilities your lower state could not access. Higher vibration expands the range of what your mind and intuition can detect. You may also feel time differently. When your vibration elevates, time doesn't speed up or slow down. Your relationship to it changes. Moments feel more spacious. You're less rushed even when circumstances are the same. Your internal pacing becomes smoother. You're no longer reacting to life as if you're behind it. You begin to feel synchronized with the moment instead of pulled by it. This temporal shift is one of the most reliable signs that your inner reality has begun to bend. As coherence strengthens, emotional perception changes too. You might notice yourself feeling more grounded without effort, more receptive without trying to be positive. You become less entangled in old emotional triggers, not because you suppressed them, but because the identity you stabilized in the previous step doesn't interpret the world from the same level of contraction. Your emotional field becomes clearer, more spacious, more responsive. You start feeling the elevated state you cultivated as a natural baseline rather than a temporary experience. You may also sense an increase in subtle intuition, small nudges, gentle impulses, openings that feel obvious in hindsight. This isn't mystical. It's the result of your frequency aligning with information that was always present, but previously out of reach. Higher vibration opens your perceptual bandwidth. Your consciousness begins registering what it once filtered out. Remember, this chapter is about internal confirmation only. You're not looking for synchronicities or external shifts yet. Those belong to the next stage. What you're noticing here are the first ripples inside yourself. Perception widening, clarity rising, emotional tone stabilizing, time softening. These are the earliest signs that your vibration has successfully shifted and that your internal reality is bending into alignment, preparing the external world to follow. External reality always lags behind your internal shift, but once your perception begins to reorganize, the next phase naturally follows. Circumstances start to move. These changes are usually subtle at first, almost easy to overlook unless you're paying attention. They appear as small adjustments in timing, gentle openings, slight improvements in synchronicity, or moments of unexpected ease. These are not coincidences. They are the field responding to the new frequency you've stabilized through coherence. Reality begins to bend, not dramatically yet, but noticeably enough that you feel something is different. What's important here is recognizing the signature of these early shifts. They don't arrive as grand manifestations. They arrive as signals that the field is rearranging its texture around you. A conversation that once felt heavy now feels fluid. An opportunity that was stalled begins to move forward. Someone reaches out unexpectedly. A problem you were bracing yourself for dissolves before it materializes. These small alignments are evidence that the external world is recalibrating itself to match your internal state. You might also notice improvements in timing. Events line up more cleanly. You arrive somewhere at the exact moment you need to. The delays that once frustrated you now work in your favor. This isn't luck, it's coherence expressing itself in physical form. When your vibration stabilizes, you stop colliding with misaligned timelines. You slip into the current where things begin to cooperate with your direction instead of resisting it. Another sign is the softening of friction in daily life. Tasks feel smoother, interactions feel lighter, solutions present themselves more readily. You find yourself taking action from clarity rather than urgency, and reality responds with a matching gentleness. These early external shifts are reflections of a deeper vibrational organization happening behind the scenes. The quantum field is adjusting parameters, tiny changes in probability, slight alterations in momentum that eventually culminate in larger outcomes. But right now, you are witnessing the first ripples. In this stage, you may also notice that people around you respond differently. Not dramatically, but subtly. They listen more openly, react less defensively, or mirror your elevated emotional tone without knowing why. When your frequency shifts, your presence broadcasts differently. Others feel that without consciously understanding it. They respond to the new signal, and interactions reorganize around it. External shifts also appear in the form of options you didn't have before. A path that seemed blocked now has movement. A possibility you had dismissed becomes viable. Something that felt stagnant now has momentum. You're not forcing these shifts, they're arising because your internal coherence has become strong enough for the field to reflect it. This chapter is not about major synchronicities or large-scale reorganizations. Those belong to the next phase. Here the focus is on the subtle but meaningful ways the world begins to align with your new frequency. These shifts are your confirmation that reality is listening. They are the early signs of a larger unfolding. They show you that the moment your internal signal stabilized, the external world began adjusting itself accordingly. And as you continue holding that coherence, these small movements will accumulate, forming the foundation for the quantum feedback that comes next. Synchronicity is the first unmistakable sign that the quantum field has registered your new frequency. Subtle circumstantial shifts come first, but synchronicity is different. It carries a precision, a relevance, a sense of undeniable alignment that feels almost personal. It doesn't feel random, and it doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like the external world is speaking in your language, mirroring the internal shift you stabilized through coherence. When synchronicity appears, it is the field's way of saying, "I heard you." The reason synchronicity shows up at this stage is because your signal has become steady enough for the field to respond in patterns rather than fragments. When your vibration flickers, external reality reflects scattered information, small shifts, minor changes, nothing cohesive. But when your frequency stabilizes, the field can begin rearranging circumstances into meaningful sequences. These sequences stand out because they carry the signature of your new state. They align with who you're becoming, not who you were. Synchronicity often arrives in simple forms first. A message at the exact moment you were thinking about something. A person mentioning a topic that matches your new direction. An opportunity appearing the moment you became available for it internally. These moments feel gentle but precise, like markers placed along a path you didn't know was being built for you. What makes them powerful isn't their scale, it's their timing. Timing is the language of alignment. As your coherence strengthens, synchronicity becomes more pronounced. You may experience multiple signs clustered together, pointing toward the same direction, not because you're searching for meaning, but because the field is delivering meaning in ways that match your elevated identity. These are not predictions or omens. They are reflections of your current frequency. Synchronicity is the external expression of an internal truth. Your vibration has become organized enough for reality to communicate with clarity. You'll also notice that synchronicity feels different from wishful thinking. There's a distinct charge to it, a sense of inevitability or recognition. It feels like something that belongs to you, something that fits your trajectory. This feeling is important. It's the intuitive confirmation that the signs you're seeing are not random. They are aligned with the identity you embodied. The field reflects whatever is stable inside you, and synchronicity is the first stable pattern that emerges. At this stage, you don't need to analyze synchronicities or chase them. They're not instructions to follow. They're confirmations that you've entered a new vibrational corridor. The presence of synchronicity means your frequency is no longer sending mixed signals. It is broadcasting a clear message that the field can match. These moments act as guideposts that show you the coherence you cultivated is now interacting with the world around you. You may feel a quiet sense of awe as these patterns emerge. That awe is part of the process. It marks the moment when your internal shift becomes undeniable, when you begin to see your identity reflected in external form. You realize that reality isn't happening to you, it's responding to you. And synchronicity is the first external proof that your vibration has reached a level where the field can speak back. This chapter is not about interpreting synchronicity or using it to predict outcomes. It's simply about recognizing it for what it is. The earliest clear confirmation that your internal transformation has stabilized and the external world is beginning to organize itself around your new frequency. When coherence holds long enough, the shifts that began subtly inside you and echoed softly through circumstance begin to cascade outward. This is the stage where reality doesn't just nudge, it bends, not in small symbolic ways but in structural ways. The quantum field begins reorganizing major aspects of your life to match the identity and frequency you stabilized. What once felt immovable starts to shift. What once felt distant begins to approach. What once felt misaligned starts to dissolve. This is not magic. It is vibrational consistency expressing itself in physical form. Large-scale reorganization doesn't happen through force. It happens when your internal state becomes so stable that the old version of your reality no longer has anything to attach itself to. The field can't continue echoing your previous frequency because you're no longer broadcasting it. And when the signal changes, the architecture of your life must update. People who no longer match your vibration drift out. Opportunities that align with your new identity show up with surprising clarity. Entire chapters of your life can close without drama, simply because there is no longer a vibrational match holding them in place. You may find that long-standing patterns lose their momentum. Situations that felt looping or persistent simply stop repeating. Doors that were once closed open almost effortlessly. This isn't coincidence. It's structural alignment. You've stopped feeding the old trajectory, and the field reorganizes itself around the absence of your previous signal. New paths appear not because they were created from nothing, but because they were always available at a frequency you weren't holding until now. This stage often feels like acceleration. Events move faster. Decisions become clearer. Life begins to synchronize around a direction that feels increasingly inevitable. You're no longer pushing your life forward. You're being carried by a current that matches your internal state. This momentum isn't rushed. It feels fluid, natural, and precise. It feels like reality is cooperating, not resisting. Large-scale reorganization also brings a sense of detachment from old identities. You may notice you're no longer emotionally tethered to things you once struggled to release. The identity you embodied in earlier steps becomes your new baseline, and the world adjusts itself to that identity with a kind of quiet authority. Circumstances fall into place without negotiation. You're not trying to make things happen. You're aligning with what already belongs to your frequency. During this stage, life often presents you with choices that reflect your new vibration, opportunities that feel aligned, relationships that feel coherent, environments that support your elevated state. These aren't tests, they're confirmations. They're the field reshaping itself so you can inhabit a reality consistent with who you've become. This is also where you may feel a deeper sense of trust emerging, not because you're hoping everything will work out, but because you're witnessing reality respond to your coherence in a way that's too precise to deny. The feedback becomes undeniable. Reality is no longer mirroring who you were. It's mirroring who you are now. At this stage, you're invited to share your experiences in the comments, not as a performance, but as a reflection of the shifts occurring in your field. Your words can act as markers of your transformation and signals for others walking the same path. And as your life begins to reorganize around your elevated vibration, you'll see clearly that the moment you stabilize your identity, reality had no choice but to bend in response. An elevated vibration becomes your baseline not through effort, but through familiarity. Once you've stepped into coherence and watched reality respond, your system begins learning that this elevated state is not a peak experience. It's a viable place to live from. The key to stabilizing it is not holding intensity. It's returning to alignment with a kind of gentle consistency. The more often you return to this elevated frequency, the more naturally your consciousness begins to recognize it as home. What allows this shift to become permanent is understanding that vibration is shaped by repetition of being, not repetition of doing. You don't need to constantly monitor your thoughts or police your emotions. You don't need perfection or relentless focus. You only need to notice when you drift and guide yourself back to the elevated identity you've already embodied. Each return strengthens the neural, emotional, and vibrational pathways that support your new baseline. Over time, this becomes effortless, the same way your old patterns once felt automatic. One of the most powerful stabilizers is recognizing that you don't need strong emotion to maintain a high vibration. Elevated states have a quiet version. Calm clarity is just as powerful as excitement. Steady openness is just as effective as joy. When you stop expecting your elevated vibration to feel dramatic, you begin to recognize the subtle signature of alignment, even in your ordinary moments. This recognition is what stabilizes the frequency. You no longer chase peaks, you inhabit coherence. As your system adjusts, you may notice that old triggers lose intensity, not because you've trained yourself to avoid them, but because your identity has shifted to a point where those old states no longer feel like they belong to you. A rising vibration naturally disengages from lower patterns. When something does pull you downward, the contrast becomes obvious, and you can return to alignment with far less friction. You're no longer fighting your old frequency, you're simply choosing the one that now feels more like you. Maintaining a new baseline also involves trusting the rhythm of your internal state. Elevated vibration isn't a straight line, it's a pulse. There will be days where you feel expansive and days where you feel neutral. Neither interrupts your progress. What matters is the trend, the direction your consciousness chooses to return to. As long as you continue orienting yourself toward the identity you stabilized, without pressure, without judgment, the frequency holds. Another key is allowing your environment to update with you. As your vibration stabilizes, you'll naturally gravitate toward situations, conversations, and choices that reinforce your new state. This isn't avoidance, it's resonance. Alignment becomes easier when the world around you mirrors who you've become. And as the field continues reorganizing in your favor, this mirroring becomes more predictable, more natural, and more supportive. Eventually, the elevated vibration stops feeling like a shift and starts feeling like your normal state of being. You're not maintaining it, you're living from it. You think differently, sense differently, interpret differently. The coherence you once generated now generates you. And from this baseline, the unfolding of your life takes on a new momentum, one guided by clarity, openness, and the quiet inevitability that comes from consistently inhabiting the frequency that once felt extraordinary, but now feels entirely your own.